Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Tech Talk. Today we have with us Richard Potter, CEO of Peak, to discuss all the fantastic changes that have been taking place in AI in the last couple of years. Welcome, Richard.
Thanks, Sunil. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so maybe you can tell us a bit about your company before we move ahead.
Yeah, of course. Peak's the leader in what we call decision intelligence, which is essentially the application of artificial intelligence in commercial decision making. You can think of it as how companies are going to use AI to run themselves in the future. And Peak, we provide our customers with a cloud platform to run those applications on, those decision intelligence applications. We put that technology in the hands of business users and we help them become superhuman at doing their jobs, basically, which we love. And yeah, we are co-founded between Manchester here in England, where I am today, and Jaipur. And we have a team all over the world now, office locations in Manchester, New York, London, but certainly for your readership and listeners, plenty of our team based in Jaipur, Pune, and Mumbai now. So it's exciting times for us. We really feel like we're driving the sort of creation and adoption of a very exciting technology for the enterprise.
Yeah, anyway, great to hear that, because I mean, there has been a technological acceleration in the last 2 years in the pandemic, but somehow artificial intelligence is still it's not very clear where AI is going. So since you are in this exciting field, maybe you can tell us what has been the case with AI, and specifically what are the changes that have affected businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. So no, I think you're right, because AI is such a horizontal technology. I almost view it really as in a sense, as a data technology, because the only thing that makes AI work is data, and we can use that in many different ways. I think the next frontier for artificial intelligence in business certainly is really getting into the nuts and bolts of how companies run themselves, and we see businesses really as the output of the sum total of all of their decisions, right? And that's where we're trying to take things. We're trying to enable companies to enhance that decision making using the predictive and categorical capabilities of algorithms and artificial intelligence, and that's what we think the next frontier really is for AI in the enterprise. So you're right, the last couple of years have seen an acceleration in technology adoption, largely driven by the pandemic, because obviously lots of things moved online, people started working remotely, and a lot of those trends now were trends that existed already but have been accelerated by the pandemic. What that's meaning, however, is a lot more of our lives is digital. We're creating a lot of data. We're able to understand our businesses better because of that data, and then we can use that understanding to create artificial intelligence and decision intelligence applications to help run our businesses better. So that's where we think it's going, but it's certainly not mainstream as yet. It's just a nascent and very exciting space.
Yeah, so I'd like to expand on the data, because I mean, people just don't understand the amount of data that is flowing through the world. I mean, we have like absolutely billions of devices, we have millions of data centers, and trillions of GBs, zettabytes of data is flitting around the globe all the time. So that
Yes.
I mean, I don't know whether you call it even a data explosion, because there's a data explosion every few months. So what I'm concerned is that for the first time in human civilization, we're reaching a time where this data is not manageable by humans. I mean, going forward 5 years, 10 years, will data only be crunched by AI? And will it be totally beyond human capability? Because you talked
I
of it
think,
making us superhumans, but I'm not sure whether it's the
okay,
AI that's
yeah.
super or it's us.
It's interesting that. So I think that depends on the application. If you're looking at, say you touched on mobile phones and devices there, like obviously just having your mobile phone in itself produces a huge amount of data constantly, event-based data, logs of all the actions that you take, every movement of every interaction with applications and things like that. Of course, that quantity of data requires technologies to help people process it and draw meaning from it, and that's where you see machine learning often used to extract insight from those huge data sets. For Peak, we focus a lot more on the sort of practical application of data and AI in the enterprise for what we would call those decisions that make up the value chain of companies. So we tend not to necessarily be processing that type of data for what Peak does, and that's really draws the link to how we can make workers in businesses in their day jobs become superhuman. Because what we mean by that, if you let me expand on it, it is simply taking the data that we use every day to make our decisions anyway. And let's take an obvious one that we would do quite a lot. Imagine we're a retailer, right? We sell clothes, we have shops, we have an online store as well. So we've got physical and digital stores. And I need to decide where to put my products. So in order to decide where to put my products, I need to kind of really think about what would demand for my product be, and how fast is it going to sell, what price I should price it at, and equally, how much do I want to put in the store to take up like a certain amount of shelf space or whatever, right? All of these things are going to impact my my business numbers, what my sales are going to be, what my profit margins are going to be, and equally also what my capital efficiency is going to be, because I have cash tied up in inventory. Now, humans, we're really good at making those decisions. Actually, we take lots of data intuitively through our experience, and we can use that data to make forecasting decisions. We can understand demand. We can set price points. We have a feel for what someone might pay for my product. But in today's world, those decisions are increasingly complicated, because we have, in the case of retail, lots of different ways I can sell my product, lots of different ways people can find my product, and lots of different ways that I can fulfill the demand for that product as well. It might be buy online, collect in store. It could be directly shipped to the consumer. It could all be done in store, but it's the same customer. So where decision intelligence and AI can help you become superhuman in that case is processing those transactional data sets, understanding the consumer behavior, and giving us like precise real-time views of what demand and price sensitivity is going to be. And then with that, optimizing, say, product allocation and pricing. But the interaction, and this is the fascinating thing for me, the interaction between the sort of human and the machine changes a little bit in this world. We're moving away from a world where, in this case, a merchandiser in a retail company would work with a spreadsheet to figure it out and then distribute those products and price them all. We'll actually take suggestions from the machine as to what the optimal allocation of those products and pricing would be, and approve those and okay them, and then do all of that. What it actually means, and why I say superhuman, is that we can now do those tasks continuously in real time if we want to, across the entire product range. And we can optimize the entire decision set for growth in revenue or profit, or even customer service, like making sure we never stock out of an important product. We can set those goals, and the AI can help us achieve them. So we become even better at doing our jobs, and that's really what I mean. So I would sort of categorize it in two different ways. When you talk about like the data explosion, absolutely, we need technologies to help us sort of compute and understand that data and what it's telling us, and that's definitely beyond human cognition. We can't do that. But for the practical application of AI, these are things that we do every day as business people or users in our jobs. And this technology is sort of amplifying our ability to do that even better. And that I think is the next frontier. And that's the thing that we're seeing, certainly with our customer base, getting these sort of meaningful gains in performance, because the business teams are able to make these consistently great, highly optimized decision sets. It's really cool.
So there is some hope for the humans after all.
Yeah, I've said it's more than, I would say more than hope, Sunil, because imagination, creativity, and that real intuition as to what people want and what they want to do, and that all comes from us as humans. And so what we're talking about here is technology that helps us process things and take away all those things that quite frankly, we often don't want to do. Gathering data and getting in a place to make a decision. Well, okay, here's a machine that's going to help me just optimize my decisions all the time and be great at my job. I think what we see is that our end users love our products for that reason, and there's definitely a lot of hope. I would say more than hope.
So you gave like that simple example of products in a store and talked of business people. So what are the industries that have benefited most from AI, and what have the most potential going forward? If you could look at these two
Well, I think
aspects.
yeah. So, looking at it through Peak's worldview, and we work with a lot of what I would call real world businesses. You know, they could be retailers, like I've just talked about. They could be consumer goods companies, manufacturing companies, construction companies. What we see is that AI in this case is very well suited to those companies that have a relatively high frequency of transactional data. So it could actually be a transaction, like you've sold a product, or it could just be an event-based thing, like a product move, logistics data, all these kinds of things. Most businesses who run those sort of value chains with, say, a physical product, they produce quite a lot of data in doing what they do, and therefore those are the sorts of companies that can benefit well from this technology. You saw retailers and online retailers adopt these technologies earlier than more sort of physical world companies, because simply the data sets are more structured, easier to gather, and they produce more data because of their nature of being digital businesses. Prior to that, you see AI and machine learning used a lot in financial services. And again, the reason for that is high frequency transaction businesses, and that's really what you need. You need that sort of data velocity and quantity to train the algorithms to build these applications in the first place. So those are the sorts of industries that have benefited, and of course digital native companies, right? Like, you know, Google, Facebook, you know, they are just huge data companies, and so yeah, that's why you see those industries benefit the most quickest.
So like those are the industries. You've also talked about what Peak does. Now, can you give some concrete examples where AI has helped businesses solve problems which would have been difficult without just human ingenuity?
Yeah, absolutely. So because you use the word concrete, I'll give you an example. One of our customers, very valued and long-standing customers, is one of the biggest construction equipment hire businesses in the UK, right? So lots of concrete related applications in their business. But how they've used the Peak platform and applications is to really optimize for a very complicated problem. So if you think about what they do, they don't just sell you a product, they rent you a product. So it's not a one-way transaction. You're going to give that product back to me at some point in the future. I don't know when. So that's their core business model. Now they have thousands of different products. First and foremost, they have hundreds of store locations and a very complicated logistics network. So a really good example was from their case is using this technology to not just spot demand signals, but then use those demand signals to set the optimal stock level of every product in every store or depot across the country. Requires some very complicated predictions, not just demand for when something goes out, but when does something come back in? When it comes back in, does it need repaired? How long would it take to repair it? And all these other types of things. And what does that depot look like? And all of the demand patterns you see tend to be quite hyper local anyway, right? Because construction projects look different in different parts of the country. They require different equipment, things like that. So that's a very complicated optimization to run. The output of that optimization, a really simple data point. It's for this product, stock this many in this location. So you're distilling all that intelligence into just a few numbers, and they've seen a huge uplift in their return on capital performance. They put capital to work by buying inventory and putting it into the network, and their main profit sort of measure there is what is the return they're getting on that capital, and they've seen a massive uplift by using this technology. And I love that example because that's a practical, real world and concrete example of what you would consider a regular business using a very modern approach to solving their problems, right? So I think that's a cool one.
Yeah, so I think that's fascinating. A common man never thinks of AI into the entire construction process, at least.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, I think I've got an overview about where AI stands in the last couple of years, but then, it's just not AI. While answering the questions, you also talked of machine learning, but it's not just
Yeah.
machine learning, deep learning, NLP. I mean, AI itself is a vast field. So maybe if you can expand
Mm.
and talk about all these concepts before we go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, I think anyone who works in this field thinks that AI itself is a bit of a marketing term. Like it's pretty imprecise, and lots of people have different definitions. So I'll give you our definition here at Peak, or my definition. Certainly, I think for something to be classed as an AI system, it has to demonstrate some intelligence, right? And so therefore, it's not just an algorithm. It has to display the characteristics of intelligence, certainly. So the way in which we look at it actually is that machine learning, which is essentially self-learning, machine learning algorithms that learn from data sets, are a form of AI, because a subset of AI, because you give them data and they train themselves, they learn, right? So that displays some intelligence, but that on its own does not create an artificial intelligence system. You need to take that thing. Typically, machine learning models are used. I mean, this is a very rough approximation, right? But they're used typically for two things. They're either used to take past data to predict the future, or you're taking data sets and you're categorizing those data sets. Now, in either which case, you can put that prediction or that categorization into a system that then uses the output of that for something. But I think on top of that, you do typically have to run an optimization, and that optimization algorithm is the thing that's giving you the intelligence. So the data in the machine learning model algorithm itself, the output, the business logic, and the optimization together creates, say, like an artificial intelligence system. That's in our world. That's very similar to what you see. You would call that almost an application of narrow AI. And that sort of narrow AI, you see that a lot in the way in which we as consumers interact with technology today. So if you talk to Siri or a voice assistant, it is an aggregation to a certain extent of a lot of different narrow pieces of machine learning stitched together to create something that has the almost the characteristics of a general AI, like as we imagine an AI to be. If you think about passing the Turing test, can I spot whether it's a whether it's a real person or or an artificial intelligence system? That's what we think of as a general AI. Like, stringing together lots of narrow pieces of machine learning can give us that approximation in certain use cases. So I think that what we're seeing today is the mainstream adoption of those narrow machine learning techniques to build artificial intelligence systems in lots of different industries. And we ran a survey recently, our own proprietary research, that showed us that 90% of businesses across the UK, India, and America are actively adopting these technologies in their business. So I think we can say that, roughly speaking, that set of like AI technologies is going mainstream. I think you can also say that natural language processing, which sort of falls under those brackets, is also going mainstream, right? We see that a lot, not just voice assistants, but you can see it in applications such as chatbots. You can see it in the form of financial services companies processing forms and extracting things from text, that meaning from text at scale. So those technologies definitely going mainstream. Deep learning, on the other hand, is still sort of more in an experimental phase, and really that kind of like completely self-learning and fundamentally different technique for algorithms to train themselves and create understanding is the frontier of this research. And many people think that you're never going to ever get to a state where you have a general AI, but many people do believe that if you do, it will be with those sort of deep learning or neural networks that help create that. So I would say that if we can characterize things into groups, you are seeing certain parts of the sector go mainstream, and then certainly in the case of deep learning and others, not quite yet. But yeah, I think that's how I would see it.
Yeah. So anyway, thanks for that overview, a clear, overview of AI, because I think this is still one of the most misunderstood fields. Maybe thanks to Hollywood
Absolutely.
movies, I don't know, because
Yeah, no,
people,
I definitely think so.
that is their first exposure to AI. So, I mean,
Science fiction.
the way you describe the professional applications, I think that is what we are interested in. So thank you very
Great.
much for that, for those insights.
Thanks, Sunil. Thanks for asking the questions. Great to speak to you.